Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Freebirth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the show, Skye.
Thank you, Emily.
I was just deleting a bunch of stuff from my phone, and I just went through that trip, that LA trip, when I actually met you many years ago. My little one was
2018, right?
Yeah.
2019, maybe?
2019, I think.
Yeah.
I was thinking, you're one of the few women in that group that I
are still in contact with.
Dun, dun, dun. So you've been rolling with me with FBS, I think from the beginning, which is so special.
I from the Facebook group that got shut down, and then straight away
I shut it down.
Yes, you shut it down.
Yeah.
You very wisely shut it down.
Yeah.
And
so
then you opened the membership and I jumped in. 2018.
I love that. So this is in a way been a long time coming, and you've lived a lot of life in these many years.
A lot of life.
So kick us off to a little bit about who you were before your first pregnancy, and what was your relationship like to the medical system, and what was your life like at that point? And then you'll just take us into your first pregnancy.
When I got pregnant with my first, I was 31. Just married my husband the year before, and I was crazy excited to be pregnant. I'd been really excited to be pregnant for a few years by that point. So the second my husband and I got married, we started trying and I got pregnant. And I had been very passionate about birth, actually, for a long time. Probably had a lifelong fascination with birth, which I think is due to my own birth story, but not just my own birth story, but the birth story of my older sister. And I kind of grew up with those two stories, and they were both very different. My mum's experience with my older sister was like a classic early 1980s, traumatizing hospital birth, like induced by the doctor on a Friday, obviously for his own convenience, but told it's because your baby will be too big if you go through the weekend. Obviously, he was afraid she was going to give birth on the weekend and he was going to have his weekend interrupted. So she was induced on a Friday morning, and she didn't want any drugs because she wanted to experience birth and experience labor. So she, got through the whole birth, which was actually quite short. It was only 5 hours. And then right at the end, without, being told, without being asked, she was given a full episiotomy. And my sister was pulled out with high forceps, came out bruised, and, my mom's super traumatized. And, she's sitting there holding her baby for the first time and realizes that a nurse is injecting something into her arm, and she starts to feel all woozy. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And the nurse is like, "You've been through a lot. This is going to make you feel better." And my mom was so upset because she'd just gone through the whole birth with nothing, and now she's all out of it, and it was the last thing she wanted. So what I think was kind of amazing about my mom is that she came out of that experience and knew it was wrong. Even though that's how birth was at that time, something in her was like, this is not right. And it didn't need to be like this. And I'm not going to do that again. So when she got pregnant with me a year later, she started researching. My mum is an incredible researcher. Even in the 80s, she was an amazing researcher. And she found the book Birth Without Violence by Frederick Laboyer, the French obstetrician. And that she bought that book, and I grew up with that book like on the bookshelf, and I used to take it out and look at all the photos. And if you're familiar with it, it's like it's mostly actually a photographic book, and there are these photos of babies born, in the 70s in the traditional way, which is, very bright lights, loud, violently extracted, held upside down and hit to make them cry. And so the book is like these photos of these babies born violently, and then babies born by the Laboyer method, which Frederick Laboyer created, or he came up with this idea that babies are aware and sensitive at birth. What an idea. Revolutionary for the 70s, but and that they should be born into a very calm, quiet, warm, dimly lit environment. They shouldn't be separated from the mother. They don't need to be taken away for tests and weighing and violent rubbing and all the things that still happen to this day. So he wrote the book.
The Laboyer method, though, I can't handle it.
I know, right?
I can't handle it. Like, men come in, totally co-op birth, fuck it all up, and then some other guy comes in and is like, what if we didn't fuck it up, and we'll just call it like my last name.
We'll name it after me.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. But that said, I'm grateful to Laboyer for, his book and the part that it played in the whole,
Yeah. He has a
evolution.
beautiful infant massage book too. Have you ever seen that one?
No, I haven't. No, lovely. But yeah, so my mom was like, my baby will be born like this. And through the Nursing Mothers Association of Australia that she'd been connected to through my older sister, she found out about a doctor, a family practice doctor, still a man, but a lovely man, who never induced women and just supported them in whatever their choices were. And so she chose him. And right at that time, this is 1982, a birth centre opened in the Melbourne, Australia hospital where I was born. And I think my birth was one of the first that actually happened in this birth centre, because there was an article written about my birth later. But yeah, so she hired the beautiful doctor, was going to give birth in the birth centre and with this, Laboyer method, and he was on board with all of that. So that's how it happened. And I had, my mum said she labored at home, and then she went into the hospital and into the birth center, and I was born 3 hours later. Her mum was there, my dad was there, the doctor was there, and yeah, I think I was about 41 weeks, but he said, I'll never induce you. He's like, you don't see women walking around a year, being pregnant for a year, do you? So no, I'm not ever going to induce you. Baby will come when they're ready. So yeah, 41 weeks I was born, and I never cried when I was born. It was the dim lighting and, the put into the Laboyer bath, which is just a room temperature bath. It's part of the whole little method. And yeah, and I was never separated from her. She kept me in the bed for the one night that she was in hospital. And yeah, I had this really beautiful, non-violent birth. And I grew up with these two stories, right, of my sister's birth and my birth. And I was just always so fascinated by how different birth could be. And not just that, but then the impact that birth would have on the type of person that birthed one would become. And, I'm sure it's not just because of our birth, but my sister and I have just could not have been more different people and had more different lives. She's tragically suffered with addiction and mental illness, since she was a young teenager. And still does to this day. And I've never struggled with those things. And of course, there are multiple factors that contribute. There's what the soul is coming in with, and so many other things. But I always have felt that the way that we were born had a huge impact on the different lives that we've led. So yeah, that was kind of like my childhood years. And then When I was about 21, the woman whose property I kept my horses on got pregnant and told me she was having a home birth. And I think it was the first time I'd ever heard of home birth, and it just like instantly captivated me. I was just like, wow, that's so cool. I want to do that one day. And she went on to have her baby at home and actually afterwards said to me, like, oh, it was really hard. And I actually wish I had been in the hospital and I probably should have been in the hospital. And but it didn't dissuade me. It was like, no, that's how I'm going to give birth one day. And then in my like mid to late 20s, I read the book The Magical Child. I don't know if you ever read that by Joseph Chilton Pearce. And this kind of, it really rocked my world, mostly because it confirmed the thing that I had always wondered with the different birth experiences of my sister. It really confirmed the way that a being, a soul, comes into this world has a massive impact on the way, even the way that intelligence unfolds in that person. And the whole like first third of his book is dedicated to just describing what happens in a typical hospital birth and all of the ways that that typical experience harms the unfoldment of the being and the soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
love that.
yeah, I would really recommend that everyone read that book because even if you're familiar with these ideas, it's just so, it's so beautifully written and so startling in
Mhm.
it's the revelation of like, wow. And he actually talks about birth in lots of different cultures and how, when birth happens in a less violent way or in a totally non-violent way, the intelligence level of those babies and children is so much higher
Right.
than babies born in
And they
trauma.
don't have a giant obstacle called capital T trauma to overcome. I mean,
Exactly.
it's so obvious. Yeah. So you read this book, it affirms all this inner
Yeah.
knowing.
hmm and then that was kind of the ignition of like totally obsessed with birth. Like then I was just like ordering every birth book I could and just like devouring them all. And I even did my doula training at that time. I was like, I want to be a doula. Maybe I'll even be a midwife. And I never actually ended up attending any births as a doula, but I did the training and I just wanted, every birth thing I could. And that was also when I obviously just became like so excited to have children, give birth, and experience it for myself. So, met my husband just kind of. Oh, another thing that actually happened then, the same time I read The Magical Child, the movie The Business of Being Born came out, and I went and saw that at the movies, and that was another like, yep, there you go. Look, it's not an accident that the system is so traumatic. It's actually quite deliberate and it's done, that movie portrays for profit, but I think there are actually more reasons than that, obviously. But yeah, so that was another kind of key piece of that, like just putting all the pieces together. And then yeah, in my late 20s, met my husband. We got married a few years later and got pregnant. So at the point that we got pregnant, in many ways, I was very knowledgeable because I had read so much and consumed so much information, but I was very naive as well.
Yeah.
Like I really had the belief that home birth, midwife attended home birth was like the pinnacle birth experience because you weren't in the hospital.
That's how it's
And
pitched.
yeah, that's how it's pitched. And even with all of my reading, like
Yeah,
that's
but most of the reading and the books and that documentary all are doubling down on that idea. I mean,
totally,
I
yeah,
can't speak about this one I didn't read, but like
yeah,
it's all, it's really, that is the consciousness almost everywhere that the
totally.
most hands-off granola thing you can do is have a medical midwife manage your birth.
At home. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And so I also, which I think is also not unusual, I had this idea that like midwives were just these beautiful people who I really didn't think there would be such a thing as a bad midwife, I was like, if they're a midwife, then they understand and they respect natural birth and they respect
If only,
babies
huh?
and yeah, and mothers and so yeah, I really, midwives were definitely on a pedestal for me. And I, felt very confident in choosing a midwife attended home birth for my first baby, that I was making the best possible choice. And I had actually, I know in one of the books I'd read, it had mentioned unassisted birth as like a choice, not it just happening accidentally. And I remember just being confused by that. Like, why would you choose that when you can just have a midwife? You know, like when you have a midwife, you have the home birth, but you also have the safety. Like that's what of course, that's what I
That's the
thought. So
pitch.
yeah, that's the pitch. So I already had known for a couple of years the midwife I was going to choose. She was a midwife in the area that we were living at that time, and I had met her a couple of years before doing some copywriting for her. And when I met her, I was just like, she just filled the image in my mind of what a midwife is. This was in Topanga, like
Okay.
Adelaide. Yeah. And yeah, she just had the the Earth Mama like hippie energy and look that I was just like, oh, the perfect not a good midwife. Yeah.
Figured that's where we were going. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she
Um
fits the archetype you've known for years.
yeah. And so the second I, got the positive pregnancy test, I'm so excited. I email her like I'm pregnant and what do I do? Because I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. And I remember her email back was like probably the first of like quite a few red flags.
Mm.
Email back, I'm sure she said something at the start, like congratulations, whatever. And then she ended it with, if you don't start eating, come and see me at 8 weeks. And I was just like, don't stop
Whoa.
bleeding. It's so weird, right? Like, why frame it that way? Like, as though the pregnancy being viable would be atypical, The expectation is you will start bleeding, but if you don't. So, I mean, so I see it now as a gift of a red flag, but in the moment I was just like,
God.
that's weird.
I just like
Yeah,
it
just
just
maybe
it upsets me to no end that these women are is gatekeeping the right term? Like they're put at the position to receive these such sweetness. A new mother having her first pregnancy is just like
yeah, the most
such
beautiful thing.
sweetness. It's such a sweet, precious, sacred part of a life and of our culture, and that the first interaction is just this, like all the time. Obviously, there's a million stories out there. It upsets me so much.
I know.
Yeah, it's obviously a red flag. What a bizarre thing to say.
So bizarre. Yeah. And, I was just like, okay, well, I hope I don't start bleeding.
Yeah, God.
Since that's the
This woman the
expectation.
other day was being interviewed. I think it was for the podcast. And she was like, yeah, my midwives came over, my waters had opened and my midwives came over. And the first thing they said was, well, hopefully this doesn't turn into an infection because then we'll have to transfer you. It's like, well, why would you say that out loud? Why?
Gosh. Yeah.
Ugh,
Yeah. Bless you.
I'm allergic to my office. And
Oh no.
apparently it's because G&M is like, because I'm irritated or some bullshit. I'm like, well, yeah. You guys know the work I do. Of course I sneeze in my office all day long.
Sorry, I just triggered that sneezing attack.
Okay, so did you read
Uh,
that as a red flag? Like, did you
I
know?
didn't, unfortunately. No, only in retrospect did I go, oh, it was there from the start. The very first words she said to me.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't. I mean, I was very uncomfortable with it, but I just honestly put it down to my own ignorance of the process. Like, oh,
Well,
maybe this is what you say to someone who's newly pregnant. I remember I felt a bit silly, like I'd reached out to her too early. And in fact, oh gosh, as I say that, I really think that's probably what it was. She was probably a little bit irritated with me because she was a bit of an irritable person. Like she was irritated the night I went into labor that I was, yeah, interrupting her Sunday night. I honestly think that might have been it. So anyway, but it did have the effect of making me
well,
feel
it's
a
also
little.
just bad business. I mean, I worked for a medical midwife, and obviously women would sign up early and then they would lose pregnancies. And that's like a part of a midwifery practice. I mean, it's happened to me as well, of course, but
Yeah,
it's also just like bad business Yeah.
Yeah. And you just don't need to frame it that way. You can
For
totally come in at
sure.
8 weeks without saying, putting the image of blood in my head.
Okay, so you're like, this is my girl.
This is my girl. I'm committed. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't start bleeding. I went and saw her at 8 weeks, signed up with her. And I had a really lovely, first pregnancies, I think, are just so lovely because you have all the time in the world to, do prenatal yoga and do hypnobirthing classes and watch movies and read books when you have morning sickness or a migraine. And I just love being pregnant, like even when it's crappy, like morning sickness, migraines in the second trimester, symphysis pubis, dysfunction in the third trimester. It's been my usual pattern other than my last pregnancy. Yeah, I love being pregnant. I love the mystery of it. And I love, just nourishing myself and just everything about it, the dreams that I have. And so, yeah, I had a really, really lovely pregnancy and, you know, developed like a good friendship with my midwife. And I do remember there were like various times throughout where I was like, that's weird, that's weird. Um, but it never, I'm also a very loyal person. I never would have left her, even if I'd probably like seen something really blatant, I just wouldn't have. Um, and actually, one beautiful thing she did for me, I had a little freak out, like at some point in the pregnancy, because I read that women who have had the LEAP cervical procedure can be more likely to go in premature labor, and they should be checked throughout pregnancy to make sure they're not dilating early. And I remember reading this and being like mad at my midwife, like she hasn't been doing this, like she should have known, she should have been doing this. And when I went to her, like with my panic and my fear, she was just like, well, no, of course I wouldn't want to do that because it would just likely lead to more intervention. And I know you don't want that. So, she had some, of course, no one is just like one thing or another. She had some lovely things about her. And that was, one gift that she gave me in the pregnancy. She kind of talked me off the ledge there. Um, but then, so then when she came to the house at the end of the pregnancy for the home visit at 37 weeks, this was really weird. She came into the house and sat down and she was, it just sounds so ridiculous. Now that I've seen your driveway, I really do want you to go and get an ultrasound just to check the heart, just to make sure there's nothing going on, because this is a hard house to get out of in an emergency.
Whoa,
Yeah,
interesting tactic.
right? And well, of course, you see it
The
right away.
driveway card.
The driveway.
That's a new one.
If you don't yet have our best-selling course, The Complete Guide to Freebirth, then you need to get with the program literally and level up your knowledge base. The Complete Guide to Freebirth includes everything we think you need to know to feel confident to choose home birth without medical providers. Over 10,000 women and couples have taken our Freebirth education course and birthed in power. Grab it now by going to our website at freebirthsociety.com.
One.
I love that you just instantly know it to be a tactic, but
It is a tactic.
Of course it is, but I didn't see it in the moment. Yeah.
The driveway. I'm sorry.
Driveway.
I'm gonna have to tell you onto that one. That's like really, really creative.
So preposterous.
Wow.
Yeah, we did have a steep driveway down a hillside to our little
Of course,
cabin.
you must have an ultrasound if you have a steep driveway.
Right. And also a driveway that you had to back out of. You couldn't turn at the bottom. And so
She's also a midwife in Topanga Canyon.
Yeah.
So this is a line she uses frequently.
Totally. Yeah.
There's a lot of steep driveways there.
Yeah. So she sees the driveway. She wants us to have an ultrasound just to check the heart so that when we cut that cord, we're not creating an emergency, is what she actually said. That was the end of it. And of course, she says that so visual and immediately, even though I had said from the start, I definitely don't want an ultrasound. I was 37 weeks. I was like, okay, I guess I'll go get one to check the heart. So at 38 weeks, we go in and get an ultrasound. And it wasn't just a quick check the heart. Our midwife was in there with us. It ended up being a full anatomy scan, which with a 38-week baby is very hard to do because they're taking up the whole womb and you can't really see. And I was also just so terrified that they were going to accidentally give away the sex of the baby because it's
Mm.
a precious secret. And I'm like, oh my gosh, imagine if they accidentally say he or she, right before we give birth. And so I was like not looking at the screen. I kept saying, don't forget, we don't want to know if it's a boy or a girl. And anyway, at the end, the sonographer, first of all, he said, now this baby's already 7 pounds, so you want to lay off the carbs between now and the end of your pregnancy because
Fuck you.
otherwise it's going to be too big of a baby.
What is this industry? Why does anyone go to it? It's so horrible.
Oh, but I'm very glad I did not lay off the carbs because I had him 3 weeks later and he was only 6 pounds, 3 ounces. So
Yeah.
yeah, he wasn't 7 pounds when I was 38 weeks. But anyway, he also like did that like crazy 3D ultrasound thing at the very end without me even really knowing, and then printed
Mm.
off like a photo of the baby's face and was like, here, you can show the grandparents. And I took that photo from him and looked at it. And even though it was all blurry and you couldn't really see the face, I just looked at it and I was like, it's a boy. And he was like, oh, you couldn't possibly know that. And I was like, so it is a boy. You just confirmed it for me. So that was a bummer. But I mean, I tried to get myself back into the like, I don't really know, but it was a boy. And I really did know. And anyway, everything was fine with his heart. So the driveway wasn't an issue anymore. And
How totally manipulative and disgusting.
yeah, just yeah. She wanted that for her own. Why did she want it so much? I don't even know.
Well, because to have a midwife in LA, they work with backup OBs.
Mm,
And so her backup OB requires one ultrasound in order for him to be comfortable backing her up.
mm,
Guaranteed that's what it is.
yeah,
Guaranteed. Like I
yeah.
would bet $1,000 that that's what it is.
Wow.
Let's say it's not that, then it's just her own stuff, but it's
Mhm.
almost for sure that because
Thank
that's
you.
how it goes. I mean, that's why they all do it. I've worked for
Yep.
plenty of them and with them and heard all
Mhm.
the stuff. But the OB/GYNs want it, and many will not even back you up if your client doesn't have it. So
That's
it's
probably what it
weird
was.
that she wouldn't be transparent about that, but
Mhm.
they're not transparent. Like I just never hear that they're transparent or see
She
that.
she might
But
have felt she couldn't be with me because I was adamant from the start that I didn't want one. So
yeah, but I mean, they all have backups.
yeah,
Like,
no, that may have been why though she went the
oh, that
tactical
you
way
didn't
with.
want an ultrasound. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I have seen like the midwife I used to work for, she would straight up be like, the doctor that we go to if you have an emergency requires an ultrasound. And this
Mm,
is who I work with. So you have to get one, which is still not true. It's still like basically completely unethical to frame it like that. But
mm,
anyway, that would be my guess. Another thing is just she was obviously afraid of birth and was a terrible midwife. And so she
yeah,
just felt more comfortable having a sign, like a check of, because it's also so dumb. Like, if you know anything about ultrasounds, what did she see on that ultrasound that actually made her feel comfortable? Like, what are the things that she thinks the ultrasound's even ruling out?
yeah.
There is a small list of things, but
I
they're
guess like a
quite
serious heart
uncommon.
defect is what she was thinking. I don't
Well,
know.
that's what she said. That's not,
That's what she
just gonna be
said.
honest. Yeah.
It's true.
Hate. Okay. So annoying.
Mm,
Okay,
yeah.
but so it's boy, they ruin it for you.
Yeah.
You've got a cuckoo midwife. How did your birth
Yeah.
go,
Yeah,
Skye?
so that was 38 weeks. And then, like, right before 30 weeks, she drops the I can't attend you after 42 weeks bombshell, which she had not dropped before then. And
Mm,
somehow, even with all my reading and research, I really didn't know. I was totally ignorant to that. So
sucks.
that was shocking to me because it really just was like the beginning of the crack of, well, you're not really here for me if like at 42 weeks I have to give birth in a hospital. And of course, I wouldn't have had to have, but it felt like
That's how
that.
it's framed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, the obvious, like, as it's like getting closer to 41 weeks, she's like, well, these are the things that we have available. And, from all the things, all the things. And, from herbs and membrane sweeping to castor oil as a last resort. And I ended up agreeing to have my membrane swept at 41 weeks. And her newly hired assistant midwife came to do that. And she was a midwife like straight out of the hospital. Like, I think my birth was the second home birth that she had ever attended. She was a very nice lady, but I'm just giving you the context of where she came from. So she came and swept my membranes, very painful, obviously. That was on a Friday night, and I did have like cramping and light contractions all through that night, and they kind of continued a little bit through the next day, and then Saturday night they got really quite, heavy. I was practicing all my hypnobirthing, breathing, and visualizations during the night, and then Sunday day they totally stopped. And I got very disheartened. I was like 41 and I think I was 41 and a day or two, and I was booked in for a non-stress test and an ultrasound the next day on the Monday. And that just felt so wrong to me. And I was just so disheartened about it. And I spent that whole day just like super depressed and moody. And then Sunday night, my husband ran me a bath and I got in the bath. I was listening to my birth music and he got in behind me. And then the sensation started. And I was so happy. I was like, yes, hopefully, this turns into labor. It might just be another night of sensations, but let's see. And I called my midwife around 8 o'clock and just said, uh, just told her what was happening. And she was like, okay, well, call me if anything changes. And I kind of got the feeling like it's Sunday night, she's home with her kids, like she really doesn't want me to go into labor tonight. And anyway, I told my husband, you just watch TV. I'm just gonna walk around. And I just walked and sometimes I sat and everything was just beautiful and I was feeling really good, no fear. And then around 10 o'clock, I just had this contraction that was like, boom, suddenly really big. And I was like, oh, this is definitely labor. And I told my husband, like, call the midwife. And he said, don't you want me to call the doula first? Because we also had a doula, really lovely woman. She was the mum of a friend of mine, lived in the same area. And the plan was always to have her come first so that we didn't like overreact, knowing that birth could go for a day or two, have her come for a few hours and, have the midwife come as late as possible. But when I felt this contraction at 10 o'clock, I was like, no, 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 call the midwife, have her come now. And when he called her, she was like, really? She really wants me to come? She's just in early labor. And he was like, she's saying that she like definitely wants you to come. And she was like, all right. And she was just around she was like a 15 maximum minute drive away. And she didn't get there for over an hour, like an hour and a half later, she got there. And when she walked in the door, she said to my husband, before even laying eyes on me, because I was in the bathroom at this point, she said, she's probably 3 or 4 centimeters dilated. I know, so crazy. So she arrived, the doula,
People.
yeah.
Like, what a crazy way to enter a home. And how do you have no fucking humility?
Yeah,
It just
no,
always
no.
makes me think like, do they not go to births?
Yeah, right?
I'm always surprised. I never know. I'm always surprised and I'm wrong all the time when I think I know something,
Yeah.
because it's birth.
And therefore you know that you can be wrong.
Of course.
Yeah, she was so
Well, and then
sure.
do you just eventually get to a place where you stop guessing? You stop doing that bullshit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. So yeah, the doula had gotten there a little bit before her and she was just, sitting with me in the bathroom. I was just in the bathtub. And it was very heavy by that point. Like I'd thrown my hypnobirthing visualizations out the window and I was just like trying to survive at that point. And my doula just held like beautiful space for me and was a gorgeous presence. Actually, the birth I always think would have been so lovely had it just been her.
Yeah.
But anyway, the midwife arrived and she came in and she saw me like have a contraction and she started toning. Because I think I was just like, I don't know if I was holding my breath or just like I wasn't really making a lot of sound. And she started toning. That was actually a real gift that she gave me because I started toning and I was like, oh, this is actually just what I needed. And I've done that in every birth since. So that was a lovely gift she gave me. But yeah, not long after she got there, she was like, if I'm going to check you, you're going to have to get out of the bath. And this was another, like, I'd never even had a conversation with her about checking or not checking, because in my mind, a midwife doesn't check you unless there's a good reason for it. So I can just trust her. She's not going to ask me if I just want to be checked for no reason. But if she did, and,
Well, to be clear, it wasn't for no reason. She
no,
wanted to know if this was worth her staying for.
exactly.
It's incredibly selfish and it's a horrible, totally unethical thing to do. But there's for sure a reason for her, because she's not staying and babysitting you during early labor.
Yeah.
Medical
This is
midwives
like,
don't do that.
yeah, this is like midnight on a Sunday night. She wants to be home with her kids. That's why I say she was irritated that I was in labor. It really felt like that. The whole time she was there, her energy felt irritated. So just being in that vulnerable labor state, you're just so suggestive, especially when you are deferring to an outside authority. So when she said, like, if you want me to check me, or if you want me to check you, it was just automatic to me that I had to be checked. Like, there was it's just like I had to say yes. And it took me, my husband, half an hour to move me, because at this point I was actually, even through transition. So yeah, it took an excruciating half an hour to get me from the bath just across the other side of our tiny house to the bedroom for her to check me. And at that point, like, contraction, there was just one, there was no break in between. It was just like rocking my body, and it was going back to front and back around. And my hips felt like they were just going to explode. And I was having to stop and tell my husband, put your hands on my hips. And finally got to the bed. And my midwife checked me and she's like, oh, you're fully dilated and the baby's right there. She's like, but you can't start pushing yet because the assistant midwife's not here. And so the assistant midwife got there not long later. Now it was like midnight, and she's like, okay, assistant midwife's here. Now you can start pushing. And I was like, I don't feel like pushing. And she's like, well, just try on the next contraction. And so I tried. It felt horrible, wrong. And then she's on the next contraction, she's like, try lying this way and pushing. And, nothing was feeling right. Nothing was feeling good. And at that point, she was like, you know what? I didn't think we had time to blow up the pool, but I'm going to, blow up the pool with your husband, and maybe like being in the pool will help. So they started blowing up the pool, filling it up. We ran out of hot water because I'd been having a bath, all night. Um, but I got in, and then it was just like this awful hour of coached pushing.
Oh,
And coach pushing is just so horrific. It doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world, right? But it's really so horrible. And it just, like, I became so disconnected from my body. Like, I was just totally severed from my body. I had no idea even what was happening. I couldn't feel my baby moving through my body. Like, I couldn't feel anything. I was totally severed from, this, really, until that point, this like beautiful labor that I'd been having. And so the other thing was that during that hour, my midwife was kind of like off on the side and letting the assistant midwife like just do whatever she wanted. And something that she did that I had no conscious memory of at the time, because I was so disconnected and just like listening to them and just doing whatever they said, and was she had her hands inside me and she was like trying to open me up or stretch me or whatever she was doing. And again, this was a memory that I totally blocked, but which resurfaced 18 months later. But I just wanted to mention that now because it was the most traumatizing part of the birth, even though I didn't remember it for 18 months.
well, your body did.
My body did, exactly. Yeah. And my body was storing that trauma. But yeah, the midwife was obviously like, listening to heart tones occasionally. And after doing that one time, she just suddenly goes, we need to get this baby out. And I just, the fear just filled me. And I look at her face and she just goes, everything's fine, but we need to get this baby out. And she made it sound like something horrible was happening, of course. And I really just think she wanted to go home and she wanted it over. But then, then when she was telling me to push, I was literally pushing like my life depended on it. And in the end,
or like your baby's life did.
like my baby's life depended
Yeah.
on it. In the end, I pushed so hard, he shot out head body in one go, like just flew out of my body. And I didn't even have an idea in that moment that he was about to be born. Like that's how disconnected I was. I couldn't even feel. And so he shot out, and my husband kind of tried to touch him first, but the assistant midwife kind of grabbed him and pulled him out of the water, and the cord was around his neck. And then there was like this flurry of unwrapping the cord and turning him upside down and rubbing his back. And why, I don't know. I mean, he was making gurgling noises, so I think it was totally unnecessary.
Like babies, yeah.
Yeah, but
it's crazy how even in a home birth, like home births can be so traumatic when you invite these horrible people
I know.
to your birth and you don't know, everyone just thinks like, oh, you had a home birth. That's so great. That's so,
yeah.
oh,
I mean, that's what I
birth.
thought.
Like,
Yeah, that's what I thought about the birth for the longest time afterwards. Like, I had that story that like I did it, I had a home birth, it was great, it was amazing. Yeah, it took some unpacking. And it took that, well, I'll get into what happened with the with my body and what that midwife had done to me with her hands inside me. But yeah, basically I came out of that birth, you know, really telling the story that it was a successful, amazing, beautiful home birth. And I had a lovely postpartum afterwards. I I just loved being a mom. I loved breastfeeding. My son was very colicky, and I had to cut a lot of foods out of my diet, which was quite stressful, but I didn't care. I was like, whatever. And was just really in heaven being a mom and having my little boy. And then for like 18 months after the birth, sex was incredibly painful. And I couldn't figure out why it wasn't getting better. At first, it made sense. I'm like, well, I just gave birth. But then, as time went on, I was just like, what is going on? Like, is this how my body is always going to feel now? And a friend connected me with, I can't remember what it's called. Is it called sexological body work? Where they like do internal work. And okay, so I went and had a couple of sessions with some women that do that kind of work where they're like, once you get into it, like a very, trusting, consenting space, they will actually put their fingers inside and kind of touch different spots to try and, it's called mapping, I think, but it basically can like release trauma. And the third session that I had, it was with a woman I hadn't seen yet. It was in my own home. She was doing that internal work and she touched a particular place, and all of a sudden the memory came back of the assistant midwife with her hands inside me. And I just started sobbing and, shared what I was remembering with the practitioner. And, she just like held me, and it was a really, beautiful, but, awful experience. Just realizing that not only had I had that experience, but I had completely blocked it out of my conscious awareness. And yet there it was, stored in my body, like in my tissues. It's still so incredible to me. And just that woman's like loving, healing touch and my own intention to heal allowed it to be released. It was, I mean, it really is ultimately just beautiful, but it was also, yeah, I felt so violated with this memory that, I still carry to this day. But yeah, so I had a spontaneous healing from that though. Sex was never painful again.
Wow.
And I also had, which Kimberly Ann Johnson also had, and she talks about in her book, The Fourth Trimester, a spontaneous closing of my diastasis recti. So I had a really cool experience after that session. But that experience was really important for me because it was the beginning of the unraveling of the story I told myself about what a great birth I'd had. Yeah. And I realized that I had been wronged. I'd been, really wronged. And I'd been wronged by this assistant midwife, but my midwife had just stood there and let her do it.
Well, it's more than let, Skye. She's teaching her.
Yeah.
It wasn't let.
Yeah.
she was her apprentice. Oh my God, what is the word?
Assistant.
Preceptor. No, the teacher. She
Yeah.
was her teacher. She's
Yeah.
teaching her to do that. And
Yeah.
if she hadn't have been doing it, your midwife would have done it.
Yeah. You're right, actually.
She didn't like stand by while someone assaulted you. She instructed her to assault you.
Yeah.
It's like it's even sicker.
Yeah, it's even worse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it's always been like she just stood there. Like
Uh-uh.
she was the person I hired to protect me and help me have like a peaceful birth. And she stood there and let that woman do it. But yeah, you're right. I mean,
She
yeah.
waited and didn't let you have your baby, and she paid this woman most likely
Mhm.
to. I mean, it's even worse.
Yeah, you're right.
Ah.
Yeah. So yeah, but an important event in my evolution as a mother, because yeah, it was the thread that I pulled and it kind of unraveled the whole thing. And around that time, I found the Freebirth Society on Instagram, started listening to the podcast. So this is like 2017, 2018, maybe 2018. And then I was just like, then I saw it all for what it was. Listening to you, listening to the mothers sharing their stories, not just their free birth stories, but their home birth, midwife attended home births. It just unraveled the whole thing. And I was just like, I walked into this. Like I actually chose this.
Hmm.
Oh, and so I was like, next baby, I'm having a free birth. And 3 years after my son was born, we got pregnant again. And by this point, I'd probably known for at least 6 months, I'm absolutely having a free birth, next baby. Got pregnant, did a pregnancy test. And I had this very strange experience when I got that positive pregnancy test, where when I looked at the, two little lines and I was like, oh, pregnant, I had that feeling of just like joy and euphoria that you have when you realize you're pregnant. And like right in the middle of that, just this feeling came in me of like dread is the only way I know how to describe it. It was like this very heavy feeling of dread that just kind of
Hmm.
penetrated my joy. Almost simultaneous to the joy erupting was this feeling. And the feeling, had I been able to put it into words, would have said something's wrong.
Hmm.
And, it was pretty heavy, but I just was like, well, I don't really know what this means and what am I going to do? Nothing. I'm just going to, move forward in the pregnancy, which I did. Um, it was a pretty similar pregnancy to my first. I had the morning sickness in the first trimester, the migraines in the second trimester, the symphysis pubis in the third, but still just loved being pregnant. And it was a good pregnancy. There was some stress because we moved from our house at that time. We were planning on moving to Australia in March, April of 2020. And so
Hmm.
we sold our house there in LA in preparation for that. And we moved in with my mom, an hour and a half north. So we spent 3 months of that pregnancy living with my mom before deciding, like, you know what, let's get a rental back where we were living in LA and have the birth there, have the baby there for a few months before we moved to Australia. Um, so at 30 weeks of that pregnancy, which had been a wild pregnancy, and I'd loved that, not answering to anyone, not going to any stupid prenatal appointments, I suddenly started to feel like I wanted to hire midwives, which was it was shocking even to me because I'm like, why am I feeling this? Like, is it fear? And there was some fear in there, but it was just a very strong feeling. You need to hire midwives. And I resisted it for a while. And then I finally decided I'm just going to meet with a midwife and just see how that feels. And at this point, we were living with my mom an hour and a half north. I mean, I never obviously would have hired the same midwife anyway. And I went and met with a midwife in her area. And, I asked her what she thought about free birth, and she was not very approving. And so I was like, well, that's really what I wanted to do. So I really want someone who, would be supportive of that, even if I'm not choosing it. So I walked away and was like, okay, so I'm not going to hire a midwife. And then I still had the feeling. So I decided to meet with one more. I thought I'll meet with one more. If they don't feel right, then obviously I just need to work through whatever this is and just stick with my plan. And I met with this midwife, and she was a midwife. I knew a few people who had used her and loved her, and she was kind of a very well-loved midwife. Very like old school. She's been practicing since the 70s. I'm sure you know her. So I met with her and I loved her and just had a beautiful connection with her. And when I told her I had had, wild pregnancy and was planning on free birthing, but just wasn't sure that it was right anymore, she was like, I can be as hands off as you want. I'm totally supportive of that. And I can be in another room, whatever you like. And I just, I had a wonderful feeling about her. And when I talked to her about things that had happened with my first midwife, she was, shocked and like, that's awful. And, I'll never do those things to you. And so I felt really good about her and was like, I'm going to have a midwife and it's okay. I'm not going to have a free birth. And I grieved that a little bit, but it just felt right. Um, and I met her assistant who I didn't have the same like kind of soul connection with, but she was a super lovely, kind woman. And at 40 weeks, I went and had a prenatal appointment with the midwife I'd hired, and she listened to the baby's heart with a fetoscope and was like, heartbeat sounds amazing, everything's looking good. And um 3 days after that appointment, we'd had this really busy day, like kind of driving from my mum's house back to the rental where we lived in LA and going to 2 Halloween parties. And we got into bed that night. And the second I got into bed, I just turned to my husband and I said, I don't know the last time I felt the baby move.
Mm.
And he was like, oh, why are you telling me this? Like right as we're going to sleep. He's like, I'm sure it's fine. Don't babies get really quiet right before you go into labor? He's like, you're probably about to go into labor. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's probably what it is. And honestly, I already knew. Like I just knew. And he went to sleep and I stayed up all night trying to get the baby to move
Mm.
on one side, lying on the other, lying on my back, doing yoga poses.
When you say you already knew, do you mean like in that moment when you said it to him kind of
Mm,
thing, or you knew
yeah.
prior?
No, I think, well, actually, the night before, I woke up in the middle of the night and to pee, got back into bed. And this never happened to me. But when I got back into bed, I thought, I just want to feel the baby move before I fall asleep. And I remember I laid there for quite a while, maybe 20 minutes before I felt like a tiny movement. And I thought, okay, I felt the baby move. I can go back to sleep. And I didn't
Mm.
even remember that when I woke up in the morning and then we had the busy day. But when I got into bed and was like, when was the last time I felt the baby move? That came back to me. And I honestly think that might have been when he left.
Mm.
I don't know for sure, but I think the movement that I felt, I know now that you can actually feel little movements even when the baby's not alive because they're in a
Yeah.
watery environment. And
They
um
have like reflexes and
exactly, yeah. So but yeah, it's like, so I had this experience where intuitively, deep down, I knew, but my conscious mind
right.
was like, this can't be happening. Obviously, your baby's fine. You're about to go into labor. They're just quiet. And
Mm.
yeah, and I spent all night trying to get the baby to move. And my conscious mind was like, don't call the midwife because you'll be bugging her for no reason. And it's the middle of the night and everything's fine. And then at, I think 4 a.m., I finally woke up my husband. I was like, I still haven't felt the baby move. And he's like, call the midwife. Just wake her up. Don't feel bad. Like, that's what
That's
she's
what she's
there
there
for.
for. Yeah.
Yeah. So I called her and she was like, look, I'm sure everything's fine, but, drink a glass of juice. And if you don't feel anything in an hour, she's like, I would say that, to go to the hospital. And she said that because they were back where my mum lived, where we were living when we hired them, but we were now in LA. So they were actually like an hour and a half away from us, whereas a hospital was like 15 minutes away.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah, still.
also, why wouldn't she just come to your house? I don't understand.
Yeah, no, you're right, actually.
Why
Yeah.
aren't midwives midwives?
Yeah, no, gosh, thank you, Emily.
Go to the hospital.
You're
What?
so right. And in fact, the next morning, because we didn't go to the hospital, because when she said that, I was just like, I'm not going to go to a hospital and have a stranger tell me that my
Oh, she
baby
should
will
have been like,
die.
I'll be there in 2 hours.
Yeah, you're so right. You're right.
Ugh.
Yeah. And then the next morning, which, Like
Hmm.
she also could have come in the morning, but
Of
we
course.
got up and, we slept for a couple of hours and then we got up and we drove to the assistant midwife because she was half an hour closer to us. So she was about an hour away. And she happened to be at a birth center that morning and there was no one else at the birth center, but we met her there. And, she listened with a fetoscope first because that had been my preference in the pregnancy and she couldn't find a heartbeat. And then she listened with the Doppler. She couldn't find a heartbeat. And then she even had like an ultrasound machine that just picked up sound and she couldn't find a heartbeat. And, she just looked down at me and just said, I'm so sorry. And um, it was
Hmm.
just like that moment where, even though I already knew deep down this was the
Yeah.
moment that it was
This
real,
is when it's real.
this is when it's real. And it's just, it's a moment that really can't be described. It's just like everything comes crashing down. It's like your whole world comes crashing down and the grief as it enters the body is just so intense. But I had this really beautiful experience that I want to mention because I just think it's very important. As the grief was like hitting me, and I remember I was lying on my back from her doing it and with this big belly, and like I was like couldn't even like breathe. And she was like helping me roll onto my side so that I could just sob. And as like the sobbing is coming out and all this pain, like underneath it was just this feeling of total peace. It was like all on the surface was like pain and agony and grief and disbelief, but underneath it, which I was just totally tapped into, was just a feeling of peace. And the feeling was just telling me, you're okay, everything's okay, and everything is going to be okay. And that, whatever I tapped into in that moment, really helped me in the weeks ahead because I never really lost touch with that feeling that it was all okay, even though it didn't feel okay. Um, it was okay. And the perspective that we have, this physical perspective, material world perspective, is so limited. And if we could see everything, from that plane of peace, we would have just complete acceptance. And so even though, I certainly didn't exist in that plane, I went through, horrific grief and pain, but I always had that, that faith in being held. Um, and yeah, just it really helped me get through that experience and really has changed my whole life, I would say as well. Um, but yeah, the midwife said, let's go to the hospital and have it confirmed with an ultrasound. I mean, so pointless, right? Um, but we went to the hospital, had it confirmed with an ultrasound, and the ultrasound girl is just like stone-faced, not telling us, and I'm sorry, the doctor has to tell you, and we had to wait half an hour for the doctor to call our midwife and tell, no, there's no heartbeat. And then she said to me, what do you want to do? Like, you have every option available to you. You can stay here in the hospital right now. You could be induced. You can get an epidural. You can have any pain relief you want. You can get a C-section. You can have your home birth. Do you want to go home? Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to go home and I want to have my baby at home. Like, this is the only experience I'm going to have with them. I want to be at home. And so she was like, okay, well, you just go home now and just sleep and, we'll talk in the morning. And my mum came and, slept with us at our house. And we woke up in the morning. We actually decided to go up to my mum's house, like near the midwives, and just be there, birth there. It felt better to birth in her house than in our rental. And just to be near the midwives and be near my mum. So we went up there that day. And on the way, we stopped at the assistant midwife's house and she swept my membranes, which here I am back getting my membranes swept. It's just interesting how the patterns like repeat.
Well,
Um,
also you also chose medical midwifery again.
exactly.
I
So
mean, this
yeah,
is what they
you're right.
do. It's
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so she swept my membranes and, she was like, look, you've got time, but we can do this. And I was like, let's do it. Like I'd had a day by that point to kind of process and I didn't feel ready to give birth in any way to my non-living baby. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. But I was like, I also don't want this to go on for a really long time.
Totally.
So had my membrane swept. It didn't trigger labor, which I'm grateful that it didn't that time because it gave my just more time to process and grieve. And the next day, so it had now been like 3 days by this point. She came to my mum's house and swept my membranes again the next night. It was like 7 o'clock. And that did trigger labor. So she left, the sensations started to pick up, but they would only happen when I was moving around. And so I was just like walking circles around my mum's house, and my little 3-year-old son was walking with me, holding my hand, and
Mm.
it was so lovely. And I just became exhausted though, and at about 9 o'clock at night, I was just like, I just have to lie down. And everything stopped when I lay down, but I just slept for an hour or two. And actually, I noticed in my sleep that the sensations started up again and were actually getting quite heavy. And I was able to just keep sleeping through them. And eventually, they kind of penetrated my awareness enough to wake me up. And it was about 10 p.m. And at 11 p.m., I was like, okay, I'm definitely like, this is getting heavy. So my husband called the midwife. She got there in like half an hour. And by that point, I was already in transition. I had him just
Oh,
after,
whoa.
yeah, I had him just after midnight. So
Whoa,
she kind of came, yeah,
fast.
very fast. Yeah, she arrived and she came in to see me, and then she's like, okay, I'm gonna go and get my things. And as soon as she walked out, I felt like baby start to descend. And, it terrified me, that feeling. And
Hmm.
she was actually the person, my husband was there with me, my mum was there, and actually my best friend Nick, who's the godfather of my son, he was also there. He was there to be with our son, but our son had fallen asleep, so he was in with us, which actually turned out to be perfect and
Hmm.
beautiful. But yeah, even though they were all there and she'd gone out, the midwife had gone out to the car, like when I felt baby start to descend, I just like screamed out her name, the midwife's name. Like I just wanted that wise woman, through that experience. Um, and so yeah, I had him, very shortly after she arrived. And there were just unnecessary little midwife sabotagey things that happened in that half hour. It's only half an hour, but small things, but things that later I was just like, why? Like
Like
everything.
what?
Well, like I was having that like incredible like hip exploding pain again. Which seems to be just like what happens as a baby descends for me. I know it happens for many women. And she was asking me like, are you having a contraction right now? Like asking me questions, and I couldn't
Weird.
speak, and I didn't even know if I was having a contraction. It was just like all I could feel was just that, enormous feeling of like my hips are gonna like fall. Uh,
Also, like, who
what
cares?
does it matter,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Why do you even need to know that?
like you're birthing. You're
Yeah.
birthing. It's strange.
Right. And then she had me, so his head came out. And actually, what was so weird is I didn't even feel his head come out. So I think I still had a bit of like, and also just from I think the fear that I was feeling, I was cut off again. I was really like severed from my lower body. And also, I was still outsourcing my authority. And so that
Hmm.
also kind of cuts you off from your own body because you don't have a reason to like drop into it. You're like, you're taking care of me, you on the outside. I don't need to feel this. I can just, I'm looking to you. And so his head came out, and I only knew because she kind of announced to everyone in the room, my mom, my husband, and my friend, the head is out. And she just said it very quietly, but I was like, oh, the head's out. Like I didn't even know. And his head was out for quite a while. And then she suggested I lay back against my husband, which was another thing that I did not want to do that. I was up like the way I always want to be when I give birth, kind of like on one knee and like a side lunge. And the last thing I wanted was to be laying back. But in that, like, I just do what I'm told in labor state. I just laid back on my husband. I was much less comfortable.
Well,
And
it's
I think
tricky because it's like, oh, I want like the wise woman, so then I'm gonna do what she says.
yeah, exactly.
It's a tricky
Yeah. Yeah,
relationship.
you kind of you get what you want, right? Um, but yeah, so she had me lay back, and while I was laying back, she had this is another like imprint kind of from my first birth, like carrying over, but it's also just the world of midwifery. Like I could see she was like between my legs, and then all of a sudden I just feel this like incredible pain. And I just said, "What is that?" And she just says, "That's the cord." But she said that's the cord, but I think what was really happening was she was unwrapping the cord, but without telling me, so it's just like, and it really hurt. Like nothing was hurting as much as that hurt when she like pulls the cord off. And I guess she felt that maybe he wasn't descending because of the head had been out for a while, but like, I mean, a few minutes, like maybe only a couple of minutes. Um,
Also, I mean, this goes without saying, but like when we know the baby is already passed,
right?
what are you doing?
What are you doing? I know, I've kind of explained it to myself, like it must have just been like she got in her head of like, this is what I do in a normal birth, but it was so silly and just an unnecessary interruption in that moment. And actually, it was right before his body came out. So it was kind of a crucial moment. And
They
I'm like,
cannot help themselves. They have to do something, it's part of the whole
yeah,
savior complex. Like if she were to
yeah,
sit back and just let you birth your
mhm,
baby in power, like that doesn't compute.
yeah,
That's not attending.
yeah. Hmm. So yeah, like I mean, a second after I said that, and she said, "That's the cord." Like his body came out, and she caught him, put him like straight on my belly, and such a profoundly beautiful, painful feeling,
Mm.
like his body on my belly because he was warm, because he'd been in me, and he just felt like my baby, but obviously not alive. There's always that tiny part of you that's like until they're born. Um, and yeah, we just wept and held him. And not long after that, the other midwife, the midwife I'd actually hired, arrived because this had been the assistant. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And in the end, almost all of our interaction was with her assistant,
Yeah.
who I really liked, but I really loved, that midwife I had hired.
Who
Um,
didn't come to the birth of
who,
your
who
stillborn baby.
Yeah, she tried to. She just missed it because I didn't call them until 11 and he was born just after midnight. So she got there like just after he was born.
Yeah, but she
She
had
was
stopped
coming
your
from
membranes.
No, was everything was
Other one.
that was actually the first time I had seen my midwife. The other midwife was checking in with me constantly and asking like if I needed anything, but I was, you know, I don't know. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so we had as long as we wanted with our son. It was another boy. Interestingly, the whole pregnancy, my oldest son had said, "It's a girl, it's a sister, it's a girl, it's a sister." So I really believed him and thought it was a girl. But once we knew that he had gone, like, but before he was born, my husband and I absolutely knew it was a boy. And we chose his name, which was Soleil. Halfway through Soleil's pregnancy, my friend, very psychic friend, had a dream, and she texted me and said, "I had a dream last night that you had your baby, and he was a boy, and I couldn't see him in the dream, but he was coming through the window as sunshine onto your oldest son, and his name was Ray." And when she texted me about that dream, I was like, "Soleil, if it's a boy, we should call him Soleil." So we chose that name, and it was the perfect name for him. But yeah, we had 11 hours with him before we, called the funeral home the next morning to come and collect his body. And the assistant midwife spent the whole night with us. She just, slept in another room and was like, "I'm here if you need anything. I won't leave until, you know, you want me to." And we didn't want her to leave.
Oh, yeah.
We got to co-sleep with my son for 3 hours, and then he had 3 hours with his little brother, like talking to him. And it was actually, as hard as it was very beautiful as well. And another element of it though was that our son had some minor birth defects. He had on his hands, the skin on his middle and ring fingers was not separated, and his thumbs, both thumbs, were also kind of deformed. So when the midwife saw that, they said, look, this probably is to do with why he died. There could be something internally as well. Normally we would just say we don't know, but in this case, because of these like external abnormalities, it makes it much more likely that there was, an organ that wasn't capable of supporting life. And that was, very hard as well, added another layer to it all, but was also, not, I wouldn't say comforting, but it was like we had some feeling of an answer, even though we didn't. And we chose not to do an autopsy. We agonized over that decision for a week, but in the end, we just said, you know what, anything we would be told is probably only going to cause fear going into future pregnancies and births. So, let's just like release him and know as we do that, everything is happening as it's meant to. So yeah, and then 2 months after his birth, we went and saw a medium, and that was very healing because she just tapped into him, and all she knew was that we had lost a child. She didn't know what age. She tapped in right away and knew that we had lost a baby. She actually felt that the baby had died right after birth. That was the only thing she got wrong rather than before birth. But she said right away, she said, I'm getting genetic abnormalities. And she said, and I can see that his hands were not formed properly. And she said, this soul really needed properly formed hands for the things that this soul was coming to do in this life. And she said, this body just couldn't support the mission of this soul. And so he chose to step out. And it was incredibly comforting to know that, and was honestly just confirmed what I felt in my heart anyway, and what my husband felt. And that brought us, a huge amount of just peace and understanding.
Yeah,
So
for so many women, there won't be any physical markers.
yeah,
And that's just another layer of,
totally.
unknown and mystery and why. And there's just like nothing even
Yeah,
to grab onto to point to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, we felt blessed by that experience. In the sense that even though it added a layer of fear to future pregnancies, like now I was afraid of birth defects.
Totally.
Obviously I had to work through that. Yeah, the peace it ultimately gave us through our conversation with this medium was a real gift in our healing.
And you
Uh,
had a baby previously born
yes, exactly. Who was,
normal or perfect,
yeah,
or whatever's the right term there.
yeah, totally.
Mm.
So yeah, this was at the end of 2019 that he died and was born. And we had this plan to move to Australia, and then COVID began, and uh,
God, what a year.
I know it was a really intense year for everyone, but yeah, we had an extra layer we were dealing with through that time. And we got really blocked from leaving. We tried to like quickly get out to Australia, and everything shut down and we couldn't leave. So we were kind of stuck here. Um, and we moved in with my mom, and we were just kind of like waiting to get to Australia. We desperately wanted to have another baby. Really, I wanted to be pregnant right away, like I just wanted to fill that emptiness with another baby. And it's very natural to feel that way. But at the same time, we also were like, let's not get pregnant until we get to Australia.
Mm.
Like, let's make this a stress-free pregnancy, and let's wait until, we're in Australia. But then, we were stuck here for so long. And actually at that point, we're starting to really question whether we ever even wanted to move to Australia anymore, even though we'd bought our property there. We'd shipped all of our belongings over.
Oh my
Yeah. We
God.
put them on a ship in April of 2020. And the only
Whoa.
reason that we hadn't left was because one of our two dogs got sick, and I didn't want to leave her with like my mum to put on the plane when she was better. I just felt really terrible leaving her. So we stayed because of her, and then all the flights ended. And she ended up dying sadly, but like she died at 9 p.m. on the night of the very last Qantas flight out of LA.
That is what it is then. Yeah.
We were not meant to move, and we didn't
There's
move.
nothing you could do about that. Wow.
No. But yeah, so through 2020, we were living with my mom and, starting to now say, like, maybe we're not going to move to Australia. Like, they went really crazy during COVID, and we were kind of terrified about that. So at that point, I started to think, maybe we should just, open ourselves up to another soul coming in. And I was starting to think about that more and more. And I had a really amazing experience where I was walking on the beach near my mom's house and just thinking about this idea of like inviting a soul in. And I was talking to Soleil in my heart and just saying, like, you let us know like when the right time is. And I was walking like through the shallows in the ocean and I saw something bobbing in the water up ahead. And I just kept walking, and eventually it bobbed all the way up and hit me like on my shins in the water. And it was a sunflower, which was our symbol of Soleil. It's the way that he still communicates with us to this day. And I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, okay.
Like, I just picked it up and I'm like looking around, like, where did this flower come from?
Wow.
Yeah, I've had some crazy experiences with him sending me sunflowers, but that one was particularly wild, floating in the ocean. And I actually found out I was pregnant just a couple of weeks later. So that was so special. And so at this point, I'm thinking, free birth, that dream, it's just not for me for this life. Like I've had a stillborn baby. I'm not going to have a free birth, obviously. And I I actually didn't hire them right away. I think I waited until I was about like 15 or 16 weeks before I reached out to the midwives that had supported us through Soleil. And they, despite the like things that had happened in the birth, their support of us in like the weeks following was just incredible. They really, they held us so beautifully and so lovingly through that experience. So it was just quite natural for me to go, I want them again. But by that point, the main midwife she was taking a sabbatical. So it was the assistant midwife, the one who had been with us for Soleil's birth. So I was like, okay, that's good. Like she'll be our midwife. And I still hadn't seen her yet, but around like 20 weeks, I had my first I'd had a lot of fear already in the pregnancy. I'd never been scared of miscarriage before. Suddenly I was really scared about miscarriage. Every time I went to the bathroom was like, hallucinating that I was seeing blood. Um, and then it got to like the 19-20 week mark. And, it's that point where, you may be feeling the baby move, but if you're not, you can really get in your head about it. And I was just paralyzed with fear for like a week straight. And finally, I just reached out to the midwife and said, can you please just, can I come and can you listen for a heartbeat with the fetoscope? Because I'm just having so much fear. And she said, I can listen for a heartbeat, but I wouldn't recommend the fetoscope because we might not find a heartbeat with the fetoscope. And that I don't think that's going to help you. But she said, I can just be really quick with the Doppler if that's what you want. And I was like, I need that. So I went to her and she did quickly put the Doppler on and, we heard our baby's heartbeat. And it was so weird because it really mirrored like the last time she'd been listening for a heartbeat was with Soleil. And there I am lying on my back and she finds the heartbeat and the same like tears come and she's having to help me roll onto my side again. And it was just like this mirrored experience, but with the beautiful outcome. So that was, I needed that at that time. I needed that external confirmation. And honestly, I had said to myself at the start of the pregnancy, anything I need, if I feel to get an ultrasound, I'm going to do it, like whatever I need. But I never did feel that. Like just that one confirmation that day was all I needed. And had a very interesting experience where right at 30 weeks, which was the point with Soleil's pregnancy where I had decided to hire midwives, in this pregnancy, I suddenly realized I didn't want midwives. And it came in the same knowing of just like, I don't need them and I don't want them. I want to do this with just me and my husband. And I know that it's right. and I know it's right for this soul. I know it's right for this birth. So I had the conversation with my midwife, and I told you I'm very loyal and non-confrontational. So I was terrified to have that conversation, but she was actually so beautiful. And she just said to me, look, you had that feeling in Soleil's pregnancy that you wanted midwives, and that turned out to be the right decision. She said, if you feel now that you don't want midwives, she's like, I know you can trust that decision and that it's right for you. And she said, you've got my full support. If you change your mind at any time, even in the middle of birth, I will be there for you. I will come. And having her, having that external authority supporting me, it just felt really good.
That's a very it's a very loving sisterly thing to say. That's
It was.
what she should have said.
Exactly. Yeah. And she said it with no ego, she was just like full blessing and support. Um, and yeah, so 41 weeks, I kind of knew labor was coming because I was having my typical like sensations at night that would go in the day, sensations at night that would go in the day. So I knew that labor was coming, and I was keeping the midwife updated. I would just tell her like, this is what's happening for me. And she said later, like, I was so grateful to you that that you still like let me know where you were at, even though you'd chosen not to work with us anymore. She said, I really appreciated just knowing like what was happening for you. And I never had no intention of calling her, but I just wanted to,
Well, I think just on a really human, again, sisterly level, like she was a part of, she'll never forget you. Like there's such a bonding that occurs, even though she like did some weird stuff, but
yeah, no, there was
there's still
incredible
such a
bond.
deep connection of being at your side during that, and it does surpass like her professional midwifery hat into like what I would call her true midwifery, her like
Exactly.
authentic midwifery self. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right, Emily. Yeah. Um, So yeah, the night before I had him, I was actually listening to a podcast of yours, and it was while I was listening to the podcast that sensation started, and they were coming like on the nose 10 minutes because I was like watching the timer on the podcast, and I'm like, wow, like exactly 10 minutes, exactly 10 minutes, and I was in such a good state, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I'd worked through so many fears in the pregnancy. And I just felt so ready to do this. And yeah, I slept that night, had sensations all through the night, and I woke up in the morning and I just felt so like druggy and spacey and weird. And actually the sensations really died off, but I was like, I'm definitely having a baby today. Like I feel so weird, so high. And yeah, around like 1 p.m., I said to my husband, sensations are starting up again. Kind of feels like I might have a baby in the day. And so we went into the bedroom, set up the birth pool. So we were living with my mum at this time, and she was really the only person who really knew that we were going to Freebirth, and she supported us completely. And she said, I'll look after, your son while you birth. So we had our whole everything set up, and so she had my son, and we were in the bedroom, and I mean, it was a beautiful birth. Like just to birth without anyone around you but the people that you really truly need there, which for me was just my husband. It's just nothing can, compare to that experience. The freedom, the comfort, the connection that you have to your own body because you're listening, what should I do now? And you're just responding. And it's just this beautiful dance that you have with yourself and God as you're laboring. And it was heaven. And it was a really quick birth. It was like, I mean, we went into the bedroom around 1 or 2, and he was born at 3:30.
Wow.
So yeah, I got into the tub like 45 minutes before he was born. And up until getting in the tub, I was actually experiencing pleasure in the contractions. Like I was lying down on the bed, which I'd never laid down in labor before, but I was like, wow, like I can just lie down, and like I was just welcoming it all. And was actually like feeling pleasure, and was just amazed at that because, yeah, based on my two previous births, like I struggled to believe that was possible, but I'm like, wow, it really is possible. Um, and then just that last like 40 minutes was super intense in the tub, the hips and there's just no feeling to compare a baby moving through your body. It's just so wild.
Mm.
But yeah, he came out, one of the two best moments of my life. I should say three because my son being my first son, but that moment was kind of spoiled by the midwives grabbing him and, doing all these unnecessary things. But my third son being born, just when he came out, I immediately saw him look up at me through the water, eyes wide open. And seeing that and knowing that he was okay was just, it's a feeling that can't be described. And his little face looking up at me, and I brought him out of the water and he was already pink. It was just like God gave me instant knowing that everything was okay. And
Also your
oh,
first time getting to receive your own baby.
yes, it was. And it was so special. So special. I mean, this is the reason to birth in a pool, by the way, is because there's no one passing the baby through the legs, or, they're just right
It
there.
depends how you do it.
I guess it does depend how you do it. I kind
Yeah.
of go for the side lunge instinctively, which then they'd come out in front of you.
Mhm.
And so you are the one to just like pick them up. But yeah, that feeling, and just also like, I just freebirthed, I did it, we did it. It was just us, and it was so amazing and so beautiful. And yeah, and he cried right away, and we saw it was another boy, and it was just, yeah, it was one of the best days of my life, without a doubt. And then I started to feel really uncomfortable, like probably 5, 10 minutes after he came out, which I later knew was the placenta sitting on my cervix, but I was a bit placenta ignorant and let it sit there for like 5 hours. And I was so uncomfortable the whole time.
What?
Well, I didn't know that that's what I was feeling. Like
That you had
it's
to like pull it.
waiting to come out. I did actually try and
Um,
traction it, but I was super afraid to traction it hard. And I was trying to cough it out and squat it out. And my husband was like laser focused on, we have to get this out. And I was like, no, it's fine. I've heard women in the Freebirth Society that have it in for like 10, 12 hours.
yeah,
And
but don't do that.
I know, right?
Everyone listening, don't do that.
Don't do that. Oh my gosh, do not do that. You don't need to do that. And if you feel really uncomfortable after you've
Get
given
it out.
birth, it's the placenta
Get it
sitting
out.
there.
Yeah.
And when you get it out, you're going to feel incredible. But yes,
Wait,
didn't.
what's the combo? You said you were placenta ignorant. There's something there like placenta placentarant. Wait, I have to play with that.
Placengerant.
Placentarant. There's something there.
I was
Yeah.
totally placenterant. Not anymore though. Yeah, so actually at the 5 hour mark, we called the midwife and we said, look, we had birth, everything's beautiful, but the placenta hasn't come out. And do you think you could come and help us with it?
Mm.
She said, yes, I'm going to get in the car and come right away. And she called us from the car and said, now I just want to let you know that if I get there and I traction it and I can't get it out, I am going to recommend that you go to the hospital. And I was just like, and we hung up and I just said to my husband, I'm like, I'm getting it out.
Get it
Let's
out.
go.
Yeah.
We went to the bathroom. I think yeah, we didn't cut the cord yet. So baby was still attached and, he's holding baby. And I just grabbed it and I pulled it as hard as it needed to be pulled, which was quite hard.
You're not going to hurt yourself though, you know?
No, exactly. And also, I think because it had been so long, I actually had to pull harder because probably my cervix was not as open. But yeah, if you pull it out shortly after birth, you don't have to pull as hard as if you leave it 5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I after with Sawyer, I like curled my finger around the cord and pulled so freaking hard. I mean, it had only been like probably 8 minutes, but I
Wow.
was like,
And it needed that.
I was, I don't know, maybe it
Yeah,
didn't. I
yeah.
just went into
That's what I
like,
did.
I went into like warrior I was so uncomfortable. I was
Oh,
like, this is coming
horrible,
out
really.
right now. And I pulled it so hard. And so when I told Sister Morningstar, she kept trying to correct me and was like, you guided it. And I was like, I
No,
yanked
I
it.
wrenched it out.
He was like, well, that's one way to do it. I was like, I was not messing around.
Well, that's pretty much what I did. The
Yeah.
word hospital, I was like, I'm getting it out right
Yeah.
now. So I got it out. She arrived actually shortly after, and she was just like, I'm so happy that you completed your birth on your own. She's like, and she was just, she was so happy for us. She got to see, our rainbow baby, and she just stayed for a little bit and then she left. And yeah, it was an stunning postpartum because, I mean, at least in my experience, free birth babies are insanely just peaceful and beautiful. And he was just an absolute, just angelic baby for 2 weeks until I made a really bad mistake, which was,
No.
yes,
What'd you do?
he went and had tongue tie surgery,
Oh,
which our first son had also had at
okay.
9 months old, so quite a different experience. But our third son, we saw actually the day he was born that he had a pretty severe tongue tie, anterior tie, like all the way to the tip of the tongue. But he was nursing beautifully. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to call my lactation consultant and just see what she thinks. This was a lactation consultant I'd worked with extensively for years. She was almost like our family doctor. She was so knowledgeable about like homeopathy and herbs and body work, and she was an tongue tie expert as well, or is a tongue tie expert. Um, and she had I'd known her for years and years. She helped me after Soleil was born to like regulate my supply. I was actually still nursing my oldest then. So, she'd been in my life for like 5 years at that point. I was very close to her, even though I'd never met her in person. We always worked online because she was on the East Coast.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So I thought I'll just have a call with her. This is when he was a few days old, and she said, you should get it done now. She's like, I know like he's nursing fine, but she said, he may be getting enough milk now, but in a few weeks, suddenly he's not getting enough milk. And by then your supply is already tanked, and then you can't get into a provider to have it done. And she just like
No,
totally
that's not good advice.
no, it's terrible advice. It was
That's,
the worst advice I've probably ever gotten in my life.
yeah, that actually makes no sense.
Makes no sense to do it when it's not required. I'm sure that he would have needed it at some point in his life because, he had a real restriction of mobility because it was all the
But
way to
it's
the top.
weird that in her she knew that you had a 9-month-old revision.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
just kind of
yeah.
damn.
And it really was the worst possible advice because it
Okay.
led to us having him revised at 15 days old. And it it was a disaster.
What do you
And
mean?
we still don't really know what happened. But we had it done at a dentist in LA, and this is a dentist that my lactation consultant loved and worked with very closely. She would always refer people to
But
this
probably had
dentist.
never met.
She's probably actually, you know what, they had met because this dentist had gone to a conference from the lactation consultant. And oddly enough, we had gone to this same dentist when my first son needed to be revised, and we met with her, and I really liked her, but I walked out of there with this intuitive feeling that said, do not get your baby revised by this woman. And I didn't. And here I am now, like 5 years later, taking my other baby to be revised with her. And part of it was because it was 2021, it was COVID,
Mhm.
everyone was so crazy with masks and everything. And she was
God,
just,
you're in LA.
yeah, but
You're in
she was
the
like,
hellscape.
she could see through it all. So she,
Oh,
we
that's
had this
chill.
feeling of like alignment. But before she took him, she said, I asked, how long will he be gone? Just so I can like, I know how intense it is to wait for your baby getting laser surgery. And she said, 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, because my first son was gone for 6 minutes, 6 agonizing minutes. It's really intense. And I said, okay. So she takes him, we can hear him screaming in the
Oh,
and I actually had to walk out of the building because it just didn't stop. And what I wish I could do is go back to the screaming and just run in there and say, give him to me, like I'm not doing this. but I just kept thinking like 5 to 10 minutes, and then it's 15 minutes, and then it's 20, and then it's 25 minutes. And at this point, I'm like so distraught. I'm like nearly tearing my hair out, and I'm speaking to the woman at the desk, and I'm like, what is going on? And she's acting super weird, really weird, like saying, oh, nearly done, nearly done. Like, come into this room and you can wait for him here. And do you need to go to the bathroom? And I was like, no, I don't need to go to the bathroom. I want my baby. And she's like, okay, just come into the room. And then they carry him in, the dentist and the assistant wouldn't make eye contact with us. And our baby's still screaming. And when he came, they carried him into the room, and now I locked eyes with him. I just instantly knew something terrible happened to him in there. I just knew it.
Oh,
And I don't know, I still to this day don't really know what happened, but something terrible happened, and they never told us. They covered it up, they lied on the report to fill in why it took so long.
so
And,
hold on. So she comes in with your screaming baby, and
yeah,
what
and his mouth
happened?
was full of blood. All underneath his tongue was full of blood. Now, laser, it shouldn't really bleed because it
Right.
cauterizes it, right? Occasionally there can be a drop or two. But his mouth was full of blood. And this is when he's been gone 25 minutes. So clearly they had, I think what happened is, I think he bled like a crazy amount. He hadn't had a vitamin K shot, obviously. He was 15 days old, but I think he bled a crazy amount, and I think he choked on his blood, on his own blood, because he screamed pretty much the whole time he was gone, but there was one point in the middle where it was dead silent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was horrific. And the worst part was just like my beautiful free-birthed baby was that version of him was gone and never really came back, I have to say. I know. And it's really, it's important to me to share this story. Is heavy, it's so heavy in my heart, because I just want mothers to know that even though this is a rare occurrence, it can happen. And I don't know if you read those two New York Times articles they were shared in the membership. They came out like earlier this year about like cases like my son. Like I read those articles and I was like, well, this is my son. And most of these babies ended up in the hospital on feeding tubes because they would never nurse again. And they had so much trauma in their mouth. They would never nurse, they would never take a bottle, and they ended up on feeding tubes. And I swear my son was this close to being one of those babies
Oh my
because he
God.
was so traumatized. Like
Oh,
he
God.
screamed whenever he was awake for weeks on end. And
Oh,
even when he was asleep, his body was like his back was arched and his little limbs were stiff. It
oh,
was like his nervous system just could not,
shot.
yeah, just totally shot.
He
Could,
nursed though.
eventually he did. He didn't nurse for quite a few hours. And I was just like, oh my
God,
God, he's
yeah.
never going to nurse again. Like, I'm now the mother of one of those babies who never nursed again after a revision because I'd
Oh
heard
my
of that. It
God.
was always my worst nightmare.
Of
And in
course.
fact, the reason why I hadn't gotten my first son's revision done when he was younger was for that, because of that very outcome. I was
I
just like,
mean,
it's not
it's
worth it.
I mean, this is not, a critique of you, obviously, but like, it's crazy how quick people are to revision.
It's
It,
crazy.
like, I mean,
I've
it's not.
totally changed camps on this topic, so I'm with you. I and I think it's it's so normalized when it is surgery in the mouth of a newborn baby. The most sensitive being you could, is a human baby.
Well, and why
And
are we all against circumcision and everyone's getting
exactly,
like I'm
exactly.
not saying it's a one for one
No,
comment,
but
but
yeah, the mouth is also an incredibly vulnerable part of the body.
and I think it's very complicated for a new mom. I think nursing with pain, which you weren't doing, but I think, nursing with serious restriction and pain is a nightmare.
Hmm.
And, there are old ways of doing. I mean, I've never had both my kids have ties, but not to the degree that I ever like needed to entertain any of this stuff. And so I say this having not actually walked it, so I say
Yeah.
it humbly. But I imagine that the only person that would be cutting anything would be me,
Hmm.
as
Yeah.
hard as that is to consider. But
Yeah.
like, there used to be an old kind of midwives practice of why she had the extra long nail, the
Mhm.
long pink
Yeah,
nail.
yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's really intense. Another thing I think about when I hear your story, and again, this is not specific to you, it's just like the whole thing is just the, I guess, I don't know a better word for it, like the willingness that women have to leave their babies.
Oh, I know. I mean, this is the thing that is I have struggled with so much since this
Yeah,
time, which was 3 years ago now, is that I delivered him into her arms and walked,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I actually left him. And it's actually something I would say to anyone listening who is considering getting this surgery, if you are going to do it, do not accept that you can't be in the room, because we
No,
were told you can't be in the room because of laser,
fuck off. You want my
whatever.
business? I'm gonna be in the
Exactly.
room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
it's
never leave your baby
no.
with a medical provider
But
getting some
everyone does
procedure.
it, Skye.
I
Like
know. And I'm just,
everyone does it.
don't do it.
Obviously, when they're born in the system, it's in the design, from,
Yes.
obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone does it. And then, these so-called providers just say that's not how we do things. So then you're at a standstill. And if somebody really believes they need this revision and they're up all night crying and cracked nipples and da da da, like the
Mm.
sheer desperation makes it so easy to prey on and to set whatever, medical professional boundaries they want. But yes, for anyone listening, like find, I mean, I just think about it like I wouldn't want anyone to touch my baby who didn't respect the mother baby um connection, and that we need, like I need to see what happens to my baby, and I
Same.
need to be standing next to them, and if someone's like wants to cut that out, that's not a provider that I want touching my baby.
Yeah.
I
And
get
that,
that it's complicated, but
yeah, but you can just insist. So even if they tell you you can't be in the room, just say, well, I have to be, or I won't do it with you.
of course.
Yeah, never let them take your baby away.
Well, now that so many people do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that
And
is a brutal story, my
oh,
friend.
so brutal, so brutal. And
And
it was
this,
like we were reliving all the same emotions that we went through with Soleil. The grief, the regret, the guilt, it was just all the same emotions. And I just said to my husband, we've like recreated that experience from in a totally different way. So yeah, it was horrible. We never really worked out exactly what happened to him. We took him to another, because he just screamed whenever he was awake.
oh my
Like
God.
a couple of days later, we took him to another like provider, like an ear, nose, throat doctor, and we're just like, what's wrong with him? Like, what is it? And she looked at like the revision sites, and she's like, look, it all looks pretty standard. Like, I don't know, but she's like, I'm going to ask for a report of what happened from the dentist. And this is where she totally lied. Like her like little rundown of the events made no sense and was really just to fill in the fact that he was gone for so long.
But why? So when she gives you the baby and you're like, it was 25 minutes, what happened?
Yeah.
Clearly he's not
She
okay.
just she just said, "Oh, that's just how long, that's how long it took. Everything went fine." And I was calling her for like days afterwards, like just saying, like sobbing, begging her, "Are you sure there wasn't something that happened? Like, did he?" And actually, that's one thing. The next day, all of his poopy diapers were blood colored. So he had swallowed masses of blood. And when I called her and said, I didn't tell her that, I just said, I said, I've got a lot of questions for you. Can I ask these questions? I'm just trying to work out what's wrong with him because, he's distraught. And I asked her, like, did he bleed? Would you say a normal amount, like minimal, excessive? And she's like, oh, normal. So I knew she was lying. His mouth was full of blood. His his diapers were full of blood. So
Man,
she's
I wish you
lying
had brought
probably.
a lawyer into her
I know.
fucking office.
I know. I
I mean,
still
you
actually
you
stand with
signed
that
everything
guy.
away, I'm sure, when you
Yeah.
agreed to let her do that, but just like
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to handle the like gas.
Mhm. I know.
Oof.
And yeah, the what you said, like you would need to see what happened to your baby. That part of not knowing what happened to him was torture
Of
because it
course.
somehow felt like I couldn't help him unless
Yeah.
I knew,
It's a missing piece.
it's a missing piece. And so I'm trying to like
even
help
to
him
like
through.
articulate it to him, like, sweetheart, what happened was this and the blood, and then you choked because you were trying so hard to breathe. Like, even the articulation to just help him integrate it. And then
Yeah,
obviously for yourself as well. I mean, mothers
yeah,
and babies should not be separated, period,
no, they shouldn't.
ever. I mean, when they're little like that, for any reason, much less a trauma. I mean, I get that there are times where life,
Yes, and
emergencies are required and all of that. But
yeah.
yeah, I feel you. That's
Yeah.
a really,
Yeah, it
that's
was super heavy. And so, yeah, again, I just say, like, never let your baby be separated from you for any medical procedure. Always be there with them so that even if something does go wrong, at least you know what it is and you can help them heal. I really struggled to help him heal because, I just didn't know, and that really tortured
well, of
me.
course, their perspective is the last thing I need is a hysterical mom
Yeah.
getting up in my biz.
Well, that's why they say they have the BS about the laser regulations. I'm sure it's not real. It's just they just don't want you in there.
Which I get. I wouldn't want you in there either. Like, I completely understand. When I used to be a doula and they'd be like, you guys all have to leave for the epidural. And we would be like, that's fucked up. Like, we're her
Yeah,
support, people. And also, they're going to mess it up. They're going to puncture, they're going
yeah.
to do all this stuff. Of course, they don't want us watching. It's painful. Okay. So,
So yeah,
how old
really
is he?
sabotaged my own postpartum there with that one.
Oh, so I'm assuming you did not maintain friendship with the terrible advice giver.
Oh, she gaslit me like you would not believe. Yeah,
What's wrong with everyone?
I know. You
Why
know what?
why can't she just be like, I'm so sorry, period, done?
Yeah, she gaslit me like you wouldn't believe. We called her on the day. We were like halfway home and he was just screaming and I called her and I'm sobbing and I'm like, something's wrong. Like, I know this isn't normal. I saw my son go through this. Like, this is not normal. And she was at some conference and she was basically shouting at me on the phone saying, Skye, listen to me. It's muscle fatigue. Okay. I've seen it 1,000 times. It's muscle fatigue. It's not even pain. It's just muscle fatigue. And
Weird.
I had this whole homeopathy protocol to support him through the pain, which I had used with my first son and it worked beautifully. It's actually her homeopathy protocol. It was doing nothing for this son.
Well, this was
And
a totally, yeah,
yeah.
this
And
wasn't.
I was saying to yeah, I was saying to my lactation consultant, I have to give him Tylenol. I have to give him something. And she's like, don't give him Tylenol. Tylenol does nothing for pain. He's too young to give Motrin. Don't give him painkillers. He's not in pain. It's not pain. It's muscle fatigue. I'm like, it's not muscle fatigue. He's
Weird.
like, if you were here, if you could see him, you would know it's not. But she just rejected like everything I said. And like the next day she called me and she's like, are you doing the exercises? I'm like, are you kidding? I can't put my fingers anywhere near his mouth. And she's like, you have to do the exercises, Skye. And yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah, she was crazy. And in the end, she said, I'm going to speak to the dentist. She spoke to her and she was like, yep, she told me everything that happened. It all
It all
sounded,
checks out.
it all
It's
checked
all in your
out.
head, Skye.
Yeah,
You
that's
silly
honestly,
little mother.
yeah. Do you know what she said to me? What she put it down to? She said, he's got reflux. Because I sent her videos.
Oh
This
my
is the
God,
other
I
thing.
can't.
Our nursing relationship was destroyed. He choked on my milk every time. He pulled off, he screamed and thrashed and cried. He would hold his breath until he nearly passed out.
Oh my God,
I
this whole
know. And I sent her videos of him and I'm like, look at him. Like, what? You can't tell me that nothing happened to him. And she's like, that's reflux.
Oh my God,
And
wow.
she's like, I normally don't say that coincidences are real, but she's like, in this case, I think he was right at the age when you got the revisions that he would develop reflux. And I'm like, so you
Wow.
think he developed reflux in the room, like
Yep.
in the 25 minutes he was
It's
gone?
the
She's like,
only thing that would make sense to make sure that no one has to take any responsibility.
right. And so I said to her, I was like, I don't think you can help me anymore because I don't feel like you're hearing me. And she never wrote back.
Yeah, that seems
That
right.
was the end of that relationship. Yeah,
How old
unbelievable.
is he now?
So now he's 3. And I would say around like getting closer to his first birthday, my husband and I felt like we're kind of getting him back. Like this is the river that we feel we knew in the first couple of weeks. But yeah, he just, he I would even say to this day that there are emotional patterns that my husband and I feel came from that experience. And when he turned 2, it was like a pivotal moment where I think all of the trauma that he was carrying started to come up for healing. And it ended up being very healing for both of us. Over the last year, because he just turned 3, I've done a lot of like healing work with him, both together with him and some on my own, because a lot of it was just the trauma that I was also carrying from that experience.
Mm.
And I feel, we used a lot of the aware parenting type method, which is where you really just like hold and let them just sob, let them even rage. You don't let them get violent, but you really hold and support them through these huge emotions. And when I learned to do that with him, it was kind of a turning point where he had so much to come out. And I had to hold space for him through some really crazy meltdowns, tantrums. But on the other side of it, they just kind of became fewer and fewer. And I would say he's still like a very sensitive and emotional kid. But a lot of healing has happened, and I no longer, torture myself with the guilt and regret of
Mm.
making that decision. Even though I still wish I could go back
Yeah, oh my God,
and
of
not make that
course.
decision.
Well,
Um,
someone's gonna hear this and not
yeah,
do it.
yeah, and look, I'm not saying that no babies need it.
Of course not. I mean,
I would say I would not get it done in the first like month because
well, yeah. Okay.
yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
if you really need it though, and they're not nursing,
right.
like of course there are exceptions to
Yours
that.
is kind of an extra painful situation because you didn't need to do it so early.
Exactly.
I mean, of course, I've seen babies that like aren't nursing,
Yes, and if your baby's not nursing, like yeah,
or they're nursing in a way that is resulting in the mom screaming and dying,
mhm, yeah. And that the
But
nurse
even then, I mean, I don't think I would do revision. I think I would,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's actually so many other things you can do. There's so much body work that you can do. And I actually want to add that with him, we did like everything right. We did all the body work leading up to it. We did all the like facial exercises leading up to it. Like we prepared him beautifully and still had this outcome. So it wasn't that we didn't do things right. We actually did them like by the
It's
book.
just with any surgery, there's going to be a percent
Yeah,
that gets botched. It's
yeah.
just,
Yeah. And of course it's a small percent, but it's still an inherently traumatic thing because it's a surgery on a brand new baby.
mm,
And I'm grateful he had 2 weeks of knowing that the world is a beautiful, safe place. But yeah, having that big trauma at that age was pretty impactful on
wow.
him.
Yeah, we're going to move into your most recent, which at the time of this recording was only 3 months ago and was finally your sweet little girl.
Yes, my girl. So yes, we I just had a most beautiful pregnancy ever. I had none of the things that I had in the other 3 pregnancies, barely any morning sickness, no migraines, no pain. I didn't even really feel pregnant until 37 weeks. I was like, oh, now I feel like big and cumbersome and pregnant.
Wow.
It was just the most beautiful journey. And which I was 40 when I got pregnant and was thinking, okay, this pregnancy could be a little harder because I'm, in my 40s now. And it actually was by far the easiest, most enjoyable pregnancy. So I just loved every second of it. And I did still have, some fears come up. I had the same fear come up at the 20-week mark about not feeling the baby move.
Mm.
And I reached out to like the midwife that I hired for Soleil, the one who never attended the birth. I reached out to her and was like, asked her like a couple of questions about it. And she was like, if you want to come, I can listen to the heart tones. And I just was like, you know what? No, I want to get through this on my own. I want to face this fear and move through it on my own. And I did. And I was really proud of myself for doing that. So it was a truly wild pregnancy from start to finish. My first wild pregnancy, because both Soleil and River, I'd had midwives for various parts of it. So the wild pregnancy was just, it's just heaven. And yeah, I loved every second, and went into labor with her. She was born March 22nd, and I had my same pattern of like sensations at night for a couple of nights before. And just had the most like beautiful, peaceful birth with her. I mean, my sensations were so mild, so short, and so far apart that I was just like, can I really birth a baby this way? Like, is this? And my husband's like, just go with it, And so I was just like lying back in the pool, truly relishing every second of it.
Mm.
And again, feeling like real pleasure and just being like grateful for every sensation. And, just it was just perfect. And just the very last 20 minutes is when it got super heavy, but just 20 minutes. And actually, it had been going so slowly that I said to my husband, like, I think you should turn off the video because I think you're going to run out of space on your phone.
No.
And he turned it off. And I swear within 60 seconds, boom, suddenly I was like, oh
And
my
did you
God.
turn it back on?
Well, I said, you can't turn it back on. You can't move. Don't leave me. Just stay right
Oh
there. I
no.
needed him to hold my hips, and I was like, you can't just stay right there, stay right there. And then my water broke. And after my water broke, there was a few seconds of like relief. And I was like, run and turn it back on. So I'm so glad he did because I can watch that moment of her emergence and finding out she was a girl over and over and over. This is another just like most incredible moment. I had felt that she was a girl very strongly in the pregnancy, but of course, after three boys, I was loath to,
Hmm.
to really buy into it. But yeah, she came out in just, I think like three contractions. She was out, three like very big, powerful, amazing contractions. She was out, she came out into the water in front of me. I saw her little face like scrunch up under the water. And I just actually left her like suspended there in the water for a few seconds, just like marveling and trying to just imprint this moment into my psyche. Because you know how it gets so blurry later? And yeah, lifted her out and held her to me. And after, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, like went to check, is it a boy or a girl? And I actually thought I saw balls because the umbilical cord was lying like right across. So the vulva really kind of looked like balls. And I said, I think it's a boy. And then I moved the cord and I'm like, it's a girl. And it was just like, such an amazing moment, just to have both, I know, is just super special. And had she been another boy, I would have been honored, to have been chosen as a mum of boys. But yeah, having a girl, having a daughter, having this most special and beautiful birth, and then all of the knowledge that I've taken from all of my other experiences to protect my baby, protect my postpartum. We didn't leave the house for like the first month. Everything was just, and she's just the most serene baby. Um, yeah, so it's been an amazing postpartum. We did have some stuff happen with the county and the birth certificate where they really tried to sabotage us registering her birth. They were lying to us and telling us, well, you didn't receive prenatal care, so you can't register your birth. You have to wait until she's a year and do a delayed
No.
registration. And then we realized they were lying and called them out on it. And then we were threatened to report them and they got really
Mm-hmm.
freaked out. And then they were
They just
super
make stuff
helpful.
up, man, because they don't know, that
Yeah.
they think, it's all this one way, and
Yeah.
they usually don't even actually know the rules. Yeah.
No, yeah. So that was the only, and it wasn't even a hiccup, it was, but it was the only thing in the postpartum was them just trying to make our life difficult around that. But yeah, it's
They
been a,
thought you were trying to make their life difficult.
I know they
Right?
did.
How dare you not have medical records?
Yeah.
Wow, big stories.
Big stories. Yeah. Amazing stories.
Mhm.
Yeah. I feel so blessed by all of them. Yeah.
So nice to hear them all.
Thank you, Emily, so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing, even the hard parts,
Yeah.
because women will really, really learn a lot
Yeah.
from this.
Well, I love you. Thank you so much for everything you do.
I love you too.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. You can support this podcast by donating to it through the link in the show notes below. And of course, leaving an awesome review on whatever platform you listen on. The more reviews, the more visibility the show gets. So let's spread the good word of sovereign birth. Don't forget, you can watch our podcast interviews on YouTube and see the women as they tell their birth and power stories. And you'll also find our viral Freebirth collection of epic, raw birth videos on our YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We've always got a lot going on at Freebirth Society, and you can find out all about it at freebirthsociety.com, at Freebirth Society on Instagram, and opt in to my newsletter below. We offer courses on free birth, authentic midwifery, the blood mysteries, as well as one-on-one coaching, in-person retreats, and of course our annual women's gathering, the Matriarch Rising Festival. Our exclusive, private, vetted membership, The Lighthouse, is definitely something to check out if you're looking for a community of wise sisters to get guidance from and to meet in real life. Together we rise, sisters. We must speak our stories, fully claim our lives, and support one another. This is the living revolution, and I am so grateful to be in it with all of you. I'll leave you with our gorgeous Freebirth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red.
I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back from the stars.